Hey, it's January 7th, 2022, year 3, the year of our plague. Welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. This show is going to be coming to you every day at 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, Monday to Wednesday. For those who haven't been here before, it's a live format. We're going to be covering the issues that the mainstream media doesn't want to cover or won't cover or just doesn't bother covering. We're here for that. The Western Standard's here for that. Comments are welcome. I mean, that's what's great about this being a live show. I want it to be interactive. I want to talk with you, get from you which subjects we're to be covering, what you want to hear about, get your ideas on it. You don't always have to agree with me. You can put your comments out disagreeing. In fact, that's sometimes more fun. Just keep them civil. And when you're debating with each other on the comment scroll, keep that civil as well. I got a great show today. It's really packed. I got guests, an Alberta school teacher, Robin Boleski. She's going to talk about her concerns. She wrote a blog posting recently about the masking of children in her class. I mean, she's worried about this, and the cost benefit, again, with so many things when it comes to pandemic measures is difficult to determine. So it's going to be a good talk with somebody who's in there in schools, dealing with children, dealing with school administrations and such. Then I'm going to be talking to Shane Wenzel. He's from Shane Homes. If you're familiar with him, he's very active on social media. We want to talk about, housing affordability. We keep talking about affordability, but the government seems to do everything it can to make it more expensive. And now they're talking about even putting an equity tax on the houses of people who they own. And they're claiming that's going to make houses more affordable. That sounds like government logic if we've ever heard it. Shane will certainly be able to lend some insight into that and some of the other things that have raised the cost of housing, whether it's municipal zoning or other taxes and regulations as well. Now, before I get to my rant, I want to talk about our sponsor, Bitcoin Well. These guys they're really a cool site, bitcoinwell.com. It's a cryptocurrency, and this is where things are going. The world is turned upside down. We know that. It's been 2 bizarre years of unusual economic turmoil. Our central banks, we can't trust them anymore. We certainly can't trust our government. Cryptocurrencies give you a way out, a way to distance yourself, get out of those fiat currencies offered by the government. Bitcoin Well shows you how you can get into it, how you can purchase your own cryptocurrencies and use them, use them practically at ATMs that they have budding up all over the West. They'll show you a map of all the ATMs they got. You can set up to pay your bills online with Bitcoin, all those great things. So check them out, bitcoinwell.com. Honest, you'll like what you see. For those of us wondering what the heck it's all about, that's the place to go to see what it's all about and why it's good. So I'm going to rant about one of those popular things, the weather. When the thermometer goes below minus 30, our thoughts of climate emergencies and green energy generation flee, and they turn into thoughts of survival. Now we're just trying to keep alive. And it doesn't matter what we're generating our energy with, whether it's lighting fires or nuclear. But technological advancements, they've allowed humanity to reside in relatively comfortably in regions of cold climates. Since the advent of petrochemical-based fuel sources, our lifespans have more than doubled, and we enjoy luxuries such as avocado toast that can be consumed all year round, even in the most chilly and isolated of northern locations. I'll just be a moment. Have we got sound? Okay. We have been spoiled and at times forget all of our comforts we take for granted and are completely dependent upon the plentiful and abundant affordable energy that we got. I've lost my stream there. I am sorry about that, but we're getting there. We have a segment of the population anyways. They're protesting. They're saying we shouldn't be using these energy sources that are keeping us alive in winter. Yeah, talk about self-destructive. That's what they are doing. It used to be only hippies and backwoods shacks that thought, that Canada could be able to live through winter and Canadians could live through winter without having fossil fuels warming our houses and creating our electricity. Well, now we're getting people like the mayor of Calgary, Jody Gondek, who's saying it's a climate emergency. We've got to get away from fossil fuels. But we can't. Look outside. It's brutal. Winter took a while to reach the West this year. But as the Christmas holidays began, it showed up with a vengeance. We've been in those minus 20, minus 30 ranges now for weeks. And temperatures have been remaining there. It sounds like it's going to be breaking pretty soon, which is good. We've had enough. But you only have to walk outside for a few minutes to be reminded. Our species, we're ill-equipped to survive in this weather. Evolution deprived us of the fur we used to have covering our bodies to keep us warm out there. We had to get clothing. We had to learn how to make fire. We had to learn how to build shelters and do things to beat Mother Nature. And we did. But part of that is fossil fuels. Now, we haven't grown our winter fur back to keep us warm in winter, but some of us really want to shut down the advancements that allow us to live without that fur. I mean, some of us are kind of furry, I guess, a lot of Greek guys and things, but either way, it's not enough to keep us all warm. But our intellectual ability, it seems to be an evolutionary reversal, because not enough of us are dying of stupidity anymore. I mean, some do, but they tend to hit breeding age before they get there. And instead of passing away from walking on thin ice or eating random mushrooms or drinking bleach or something, the simple-minded among us are getting government jobs where they can exist in a world devoid of human common sense or immediate consequences. And now they're drafting government energy policies. Now, despite Canada being an energy capital, Alberta's energy system provider had to issue an energy emergency alert just a couple of weeks ago. The cold weather was putting such a draw on our power sources that we were at risk of blackouts or brownouts. And this isn't minor. Think about that. If your house is heated by natural gas, it doesn't matter if your furnace doesn't have a fan kicking onto it. So you're not going to get heat. And what happens after a few hours? Your pipes start bursting, your house floods, and you're living in non-survivable conditions. This is the energy reality in Canada in winter. And people think that we can live without that. I mean, we don't have the other sources. We've had decades, we've spent billions subsidizing, studying, building alternative projects, solar and wind. And where are we at? Well, fossil fuels, I checked into it. They're providing 91% of our energy generation in Alberta right now. Solar is providing 0 when I checked in on that, and wind at 4.7. It's actually a bit breezy out. That's a little higher. So, I mean, we still have 91% of our energy is coming from fossil fuels, and there are idiots out there who think we should get rid of it. I get that, by the way, from a fantastic Twitter account. If you're on Twitter, it's called Reliable AB Energy, and they keep showing updates on where your power is coming from. That's the energy reality. Wind and solar, they're not reliable enough. They don't give us nearly enough energy when we need it most. They're just supplemental. We need to face these realities. Now, think about the electrical grid. If we try to charge a couple million electric cars and electrically heat a whole pile of houses, because that's what they're saying, we're going to go all electric. We're going to go that route. What's going to happen? We can't even keep up with the current load right now when millions of cars are powered by gasoline, when our homes are heated by natural gas. How on earth is the electrical grid going to keep up when electricity is powering all these things and somehow not being generated with natural gas and coal? It's not. I don't see any nuclear reactors coming on stream because apparently that's bad too. So where are we supposed to go? Look, we got to get past this senseless and it's fanatical push towards renewable resources. I mean, let's examine it, try supplemental things, experiment, but we aren't ready to move. So Mother Nature gave us an energy reality check this last couple of weeks. She does it every year. Go outside, feel that wind on your face. It reminds you of how unsurvivable it is out there without fossil fuels. And then in summertime, when you're thinking you might be able to live without it, when you've turned off your furnace, when your car doesn't need to heat up that long, don't forget how that felt on your face. It's going to come back every winter. Nature's offering a free lesson. Ignore it at your peril. Okay, so we're going to check into the newsroom here with Melanie Risdon right away and see what is breaking out there in the Alberta news world. Hey, Melanie, how you doing?
Good. How are you? Sounds like I heard a little bit about your rant there.
Yes. I get crabby when I'm cold.
Yeah, that's okay. But I thought I would sort of add to that. It looks like we just published a story about the feds spending $1.4 million for solar panels up in the north, where at times there's only 4 hours of sunlight a day.
Yeah, I worked actually, we talked about that in the newsroom earlier today. I spent 4 winters in the Arctic, and when you get past the Arctic Circle up in Nunavut, Tuktoyaktuk, where I was at, you get 0 hours of sunlight a day for a matter of months, actually.
Yeah, so some good climate initiatives there, 1.4 million for solar panels. What else have we got today? We are just working on a breaking story right now, actually. The health minister, the federal health minister, says provinces could be looking to make COVID vaccines mandatory. He does confirm that it will be up to provinces to make those decisions, likely not going to be a federal directive, but that is breaking news. We're just getting some more information from the press conference that was held today. So yeah, I will have more of that on the website here coming up. We also have, let's see here. It looks like Keurig has made some false claims and have been caught and potentially fined for saying that their pods, the coffee pods, are recyclable, when in many provinces they aren't. So they are facing, I don't know that it's necessarily a $4 million fine, but it's sort of a they're being billed $4 million to put towards different programs and whatnot for what happened with that claim. Let's see here. We've got a couple of things that we're working on. Yeah, go ahead.
Greenwashing. I just like that term when it comes to it. You know, those companies that try to make you feel green about stuff, but they aren't really when they do it. So it's good to see it biting some of them in the butt. You know, same sort of thing. Oh, we power Calgary's LRTs on renewable energy. No, you don't. You just pay a premium to some of those windmills out there and still end up getting it from natural gas. But sorry to interrupt. I just have to interject with my rants.
For sure. And, speaking of that, looks like taxpayers are also going to be on the hook for close to $3 billion when it comes to cleaning up old abandoned mines, tailing ponds, old ex-military sites, places all up in the Northern Territories in Canada. Looks like we could have about $3 billion on the books for those cleanup and decontamination of a lot of those sites. So that is yet another environmental initiative that is going to be quite costly for sure. Let's see here, and we've got O'Toole actually having a few terse words for the Trudeau government for continuing to bring in supplies from China when we can be sourcing them. There's actually a chance for us to source them local, within the country, and we're still spending hundreds of millions of dollars procuring these PPE supplies, masks, gloves, things like that from China. So O'Toole's kind of blasting Trudeau about that. We'll have that story up here fairly quickly.
Well, it's refreshing to see O'Toole blasting Trudeau about something, but usually what O'Toole's upset about today turns into his policy next week. I hope he holds his ground on being a non-liberal for an afternoon and carries it on for a little while. It'll be interesting to watch that one develop.
Yeah.
But so for people, I mean, I suspect my news nose says it's going to become the story of the day when we have a federal health minister saying the only way we're going to get out of the pandemic is mandatory vaccinations. I mean, that's that language we're seeing in Austria, other countries where they're forcing people. They're forcing people to take a medication. They're forcing a needle into their arms. They're making it illegal for you not to take the medication the government tells you to take. Think about that, people. Think of how serious this is, how distressing this is. And he's saying what the provinces, that'll be their responsibility. But that's kind of the federal warning shot saying, okay, we're going to let you guys shove those needles into people's arms by force. Or perhaps, there's always that if in the background. We might take it over and do it on your behalf if you don't later.
Mm-hmm. Did you see about that burger joint? It was just on the site there. Did you see the story about the burger joint in Winnipeg kind of doing the little loop around the QR code?
Yeah, that was interesting. We're seeing kind of a gray market, I guess you could almost say. It's not totally illegal, but they're kind of, when you get government infringing too much, people find ways around. The Soviet Union used to be great for their measures of commerce and so on. And these guys, what was it? They have the scanner for your vaccine passport, but they're kind of using an honor system saying, well, we're not going to take the responsibility of determining it, but customers, please utilize it before you come in and we'll take your word for it.
Yeah, that's right. So they've got it posted for their patrons that come in. You just scan yourself. It's a self scanner. You scan, come sit down. And like you said, honor system. So they are still scanning QR codes within the facility, but the little sign that they have posted says, do not ask our staff for help. We are not government officials. We are not, qualified. We do not want to take the liability for this. And then they post the phone number for the Ministry of Health in Winnipeg or in Manitoba, as well as the phone number for the Chief Medical Officer. So you have any questions, those are who you call. Otherwise, you sit down and enjoy what looks like a really good burger.
Okay. Well, I mean, people are pushing back how they can as these mandates come in. They're trying to keep their businesses running. They're trying to keep life livable and human for others. So we'll watch as these businesses, there's a gym in Kelowna that's been trying as well. And we've seen.
Well, I have an update on that for you if you want. Sounds like that gym. So we broke the story. Our reporter in BC, Reed, broke the story and brought it to us a couple of days ago. Now, since that story has gone public, it sounds like the West Kelowna, the city of West Kelowna, has pulled their business license. They have now published an open letter to the mayor, demanding sort of proof of how their the decisions that they're making are leading to a safer environment and whatnot. So Reed is actually digging into that a little bit more today. And so we're hoping to have an update on that coming up this afternoon.
Yeah, it's just outright thuggery. Well, we'll be watching, so make sure to go to westernstandardonline.com and see what Melanie and Dave and Eva and all the rest are doing for breaking stories. They're coming out all the time. We get them up there as fast as we can get them. So thanks for joining me today, and we'll check in again on Monday with you.
You bet.
All right, thanks, Melanie. And yeah, always lots going on. Cheryl is responding a bit to the rant earlier, pointing out that we should thank our oil and gas workers who are working out in this awful weather, and that's absolutely true. Common sense, says if you live in a cold climate, Pat's saying this, you burn fossil fuel in order to stay warm. But common sense is just terribly hard to find these days. Before I get on to my next guest, I'm going to talk about sponsor in a moment, but also point out, I didn't catch that in the early part. I'm going to be talking in the later part of the show with Linda Slobodian about, she put out a column and she's following up on it. We have some CBC journalists, if I want to call it that. They've been getting funded by the CBC to do a documentary, yet it turns out they are actually radical activists who are not just covering illegal barricades and protests, they are taking part in them. They're one of the protesters. They just seem to throw up that journalist shield when they're about to get arrested, which they did. The charges got dropped, but it's gross seeing our tax dollars being spent on initiatives such as that. I mean, if we're going to have a state broadcaster, they should at least be making a little bit of effort to be impartial. And these guys are crazy. They're not even close. So we'll be talking to Linda about that in the later part of the show at about 12:40, I believe. And I'll have Shane Wenzel on later. I'm going to speak to our sponsor quickly here, though. And then I'm going to get on to Robin Boleski, who is a teacher in Alberta, quite concerned about his students. So the Canada Shooting Sports Association is our sponsor to speak of here. These guys are at, this is a URL. It's a little difficult, CSSA-CILA.org. Or again, just Google Canada Shooting Sports Association. These guys, the name kind of says it all. They're an association that stands up for the responsible, legal, safe use of firearms, whether it's for sport shooting at targets and for fun or for hunting, or just to collect them even. Because all of these rights, unfortunately, are under threat from the federal government. They want to take your property away. They want to illegalize the property that you've been legally and safely using for this long, and they want to take it out of your hands. So these guys are promoting safe utilization of firearms, because that's what most of us do. They're good, fun things, and we can use them for a number of safe uses. And they've got some court challenges. They're standing up for firearms owners as well to make sure we can maintain those rights to keep doing that. So check them out, Canada Shooting Sports Association. Look them up online, join them help you. Okay, so I'm going to get on to our guest here, Robin Boleski. Hey there, Robin. How you doing?
I'm doing well, sir. Thank you. Can you hear me?
I do indeed. So okay, I appreciate getting another voice, because a lot of us get upset. This is a big issue, and as I mentioned earlier in this, Robin is a teacher in Alberta who has put up a blog posting talking and expressing concerns about these masking mandates as we return to school and the past ones and how those are impacting kids. So thank you for coming on to talk with me about that today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. First thing I'd like to ask you, though, is how is that climate emergency in Calgary? Is it an apocalyptic scene on the streets of Calgary and sort of frantic people running everywhere and things of this nature?
Not quite yet, but it's supposed to warm up in a couple of days, so we might all start frying like ants under a magnifying glass. But in the meantime, so far, so good. So,
got you. Yeah, very good. Okay,
so maybe we'll summarize a little bit of what inspired you, I guess, to write that posting. I mean, I know it's difficult in areas of medical or educational areas, right, because they don't like people talking outside of the administration or the union line sometimes. But that's why I appreciate somebody speaking up. So what did you go to there?
Okay, well, thank you very much. And yes, I do have to walk a fine line here. We have a code of conduct that says we must maintain the honor and the dignity of the profession. I believe the steps I'm taking are perfectly in line with that right now. We've also got some documentation in our union that entails sort of adhering to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so essentially, I don't believe that Section 1 of the Charter has been justifiably been justified by the government. Now, you mentioned sort of, I'm on the surface, I'm out of my sort of realm in that I'm not an epidemiologist or a virologist or an immunologist or an infectious disease expert or what have you. But I did some digging, and you got the Becky Pringle of the National Education Association, huge union in the United States, who has phone call privileges to Rochelle Walensky, the CDC director, right? So her credentials are a middle school science teacher, okay? So she's allowed to dictate policy from that perspective. You've also got Kelly Troutner, another prominent union head. She's the senior director of health, I want to say, for the AFT, American Federation of Teachers. She was allowed to go so far as to revise the CDC documents verbatim from her suggestions. And so Troutner's qualifications are a background of law, which is impressive, granted, yes, and political studies, I believe. So, none of these characters are infectious disease experts. Brandy Ray, the lady who was the president of the Alberta, let's see if I can get this right, School Councils Association. I don't think she's an infectious disease expert. And again, I need to be careful. I can't disparage my colleagues here. So look, I'm a lay person and I'm not any of the above credentials just listed, but, I've done a lot of reading. And so, and I'm concerned about the influence of politics behind these mandates. And as far as I can tell, using the gold standard of research for masking, there is scant evidence to suggest that it's going to mitigate the spread of, a respiratory virus in this case.
And I understand. Yeah. No, I was just letting you go there to see if you're, because that's part of it. I mean, aside from, your research as well as you can on the epidemiologists and the experts in that end of the field, the end that you're at, though, is at the end of the line when it comes to the regulation. So what you're seeing firsthand, though, are the mandates and the impacts that they have on those students in your room. And we are seeing a lot of evidence that, whether it's well-meaning or not, masking has a very little or negligible impact on preventing spread of this. I mean, they're talking now saying that we shouldn't use cloth masks anymore. Well, you've been forcing us to wear those things for a year and a half. What have we been doing it for? What was the point? Well, we're going to have scuba gear pretty soon if they actually want to get realistic in stopping this. But what I'm interested in is, how does the wearing of the mask, because some people say, well, it's just a mask, who cares, even if it doesn't help, which is stupid, but even if it doesn't help much, just wear it. But does it impact kids? Does it have an effect on them? I mean, how does that impact your classroom?
Well, this is purely speculation, but my conjecture is it's the face of the pandemic. So it's the is that a bad word? The advertisement of the pandemic. But just to get back to kind of what you were saying there, on the ground roots level in the classroom, and I got to be careful how I state this, but I put in writing to the ministry, my employers, my association, and I essentially said, look, can somebody sit down with me, please, and walk me through this? If I'm expected to be a compliance officer for AHS diktats, then sell this to me. Why? And the response that you get is ad hominem labels: anti-masker, right? Conservative, alt-right, Trudeau with the massage, you're a misogynist, you're a racist, right? Things of this nature. So, and so I made that very clear, and I risked being disciplined. And I said, look, I am not going to be an enthusiastic compliance officer for AHS unless I believe this is true. Show me the gold standard randomized controlled trials that this stuff will be effective. Now, you're right about the part about the cloth masks. Now, I take that as a tacit admission that the original mandate was bogus. And, I see all over social media this revelation from people that, COVID is airborne, like it trends on Twitter. Well, yeah, Professor Rancour, whom I cite in my blog there, has been all over that from day one, which is, he argues, well, not him, it's the science argues That's the explicit purpose that a cloth mask doesn't work. It's suspended in the aerosol particles. COVID is indeed airborne, yes. And to further that, I mean, I've got a list of, and these are great papers, these ones I linked on my blog. You know, Runcourt and the Ontario Civil Liberties Association cites, I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And these are N95 studies in a healthcare setting where these people are not just expected to kind of be honest, word of mouth sort of data gathering, like, yeah, oh yeah, I wore my mask all day. Like, these are healthcare workers who had them on all day, and you had a control group who did not, which is how a proper gold standard study should be sort of undertaken. And again, all these studies say, you know, no significant difference in infection, right? So what's going on here? My wife, God bless her, she works in the capacity of government, and she's kind of sort of, you know, lower key. And I ask her all the time, it's like, am I, you know, going goofy here? What's like, so she kind of tries to even me out, but I honestly, you know, this troubles me, and it has from day one. And I put myself in a position to be disciplined. I might be doing that right now, you know?
Well, and it's just important, yeah, to talk about the whole thing. And as you've laid out, you know, the amount of benefit from this masking is clearly pretty negligible, if any, at this point. And then the other thing nobody seems to talk about, or not nearly enough, is that, I mean, these masks have an impact. We are expressive beings. Our faces transmit our emotions to each other, and we're taking a quarter to a half of our face away. These kids are growing up learning not to be able to smile or scowl at each other. I mean, you know, how would I have gotten my knuckles wrapped if the teacher didn't see me scowling at them when I disagreed? And we're creating this culture of fear. I mean, part of growing up and going to school is the socializing, the getting, you know, interaction. And if you're told, well, you always got to stay 6 feet from each other, and you got to be scared of each other, this has a long-term impact. Like, we can't pretend that putting these masks on them has zero impact. I mean, it definitely has an impact. And so people aren't just being whiners when we're concerned about wearing them. We're worried about how it's going to impact them. And as a teacher, you witness that every day, and you're concerned for your kids. Yeah.
Well, Cory, but you are being a whiner, though. That's the thing, right? And you're this, you know, because it gets flipped into this sort of name-calling political game. So, Cory, you're a member of the white male patriarchy, and you're a part of the oppressor group, and your opinion doesn't matter, and you're an anti-masker, and you're a conservative, right? And this political game gets sort of played too, which is all part and parcel. And then, you know, you got Rachel Notley essentially claiming that the UCP is playing ideological games, you know, when what I see from their side is the exact same thing. So to get back to your business about the psychological effects, I must concede that I haven't, you know, delved into that too deeply. A colleague of mine, Russell Hillier, out of Calgary.
I know Russell.
Yeah. So he covered that, you know, I want to say, I don't know how long ago. That was about in September too, when we had rumblings like, okay, you know what, this optional masking business is not going to last. So he saw that coming down the line. So he stepped out in front and got in front of this too publicly as well. So, you know, my realm, I'm a high school math nerd, and I like to sit down. I'm kind of, you know, I've got some introverted qualities, so I can sit down with a study and I can read it and I can sort of go over it a few times and what have you. But yeah, like I tried to say at the beginning, this has been spun into a sort of like, we're nutcases. I'm an alt-right nutcase, even though I've been a centrist my whole life, and I've valued liberal, you know, democracy sort of values, and so
yeah, it's not unreasonable to question, you know, what's going on behalf of the kids you've been entrusted with. I mean, we don't know if masks, well, the bottom line is, if we could see some evidence, if we saw, hey, this school had masking, this one didn't, this school, a whole bunch of kids were harmed because they didn't have the masking, thus the masking is good, I'd be all over it. I'd say, well, geez, we've got a safety device that's definitely helping children. Right. Let's impose it. But we're not seeing that. We're not seeing good evidence of what this is doing. So why are we carrying on, or why are we at least not even allowing the discussion of it? That's the concern.
Well, that's kind of where, again, this is speculation as well, but that's kind of my argument, where this is sort of spun into this sort of, and this is the way the left's going, man. You don't ask questions, and don't, you know, like that, say, hey, let's censor this person. You know, you got Silicon Valley getting rid of Twitter accounts of doctors who question this. So, you know, So yeah, it's interesting. And the great point you brought up there, you know, we have no means whatsoever to evaluate this mandate. Do we know this works? And what evidence do we have? What kind of a study has been done? They don't even allow a control group, right? So
well, that's it. I mean, you might be wrong. Who knows? But let's have the discussion. Let's talk about it. And I mean, yeah, I get tired of that, and I get it on social media all the time. Well, where's your doctorate from, Mr. Morgan?
Exactly.
You know, I don't need to be a chef to know when I've eaten a crappy meal. Like, I can't necessarily produce the good meal,
right,
but I can speak to the food, and I can look at statistics. I can look at other things. I can anecdotally look at life events and affairs and apply that to things. I mean, I wouldn't jump up and give people direct health advice, but I've got the right and ability to question some of the advice we're getting from these guys.
Yes, for sure. And on top of that, too, you know, they try to disparage Professor Rancourt by saying, oh, he's a climate denialist, and he's, you know, he got in trouble at the University of Ottawa and stuff. But it's like, okay, well, I don't see Dr. Hinshaw sitting down in a debate. I mean, at the very least, down south, what's his name for the CDC, Fauci, he gets to get grilled under Congress a little bit, and he gets to get sweat under the collar here. What kind of debate have these HS, I call them dictators, I'm sorry, what kind of debate have they engaged in? This is a democracy. This is you know, we are a liberal democracy, and we're not acting like it. We're just being ruled over by press conference. And it's time the Albertans, parents, ask questions. Now, I dug up this information through a watchdog group called Americans for Public Trust. They had to go and get a Freedom of Information request to garner these emails to determine the communication amongst the unions and the CDC. Well, what kind of communication is going on here? I mean, again, I got to be careful. This is my association, but I'm also a parent too, right? I've got a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old.
No, and I appreciate that. And again, not only just with the kids of your own, but I mean, there's a role that teachers have. We're entrusting our children to their care. And I don't expect teachers to make policy, but I want them to observe what they think is good and bad in the classrooms and be able to speak to it to make a better environment overall with our kids. And when people are afraid to speak up, we're not going to get better policy, and we all lose for it. So I do appreciate you speaking up on it. I guess before we go, where can we get more information? Like, where's the URL for your blog post so other people can see it in full with the work you've done and perhaps future updates that you're going to be putting up there?
Yeah, no, that's sure. I can link it to, I've just got a Twitter account, and again, I'm just, I've been on Twitter since the summer, and I'm a mere 50 followers. I'm not out to look for followers. I've never had social media. I dabbled in Facebook when it first started in about 06 or 07, but you know, I'm not in this for notoriety. I'm in this because I want my kids to not wear masks, and I don't want to be an HS compliance officer. So, but yeah, to answer your question, I just have a Twitter account under my name, full name, and I'll have it pinned there. And I encourage you to check out Professor Denis Rancourt's. He's got a website, and that guy is he's been all over this stuff from day one. And you know what? Again, he just gets dismissed as hey, he's a wacko. He's one of those guys. And that's the trick. That's the trick and it's this left-wing sort of censorship business of, hey, don't ask questions, you know.
Yeah, the dismissiveness. So no, I appreciate that. So I'll just give the URL for people too. And if you're listening, it's robinboleski.blogspot.com. And you can find the posting there with what Robin wrote up. And I imagine, as I said, perhaps some future postings. And Robin Boleski, if you're looking for it on Twitter, is where you'll see what Robin's been up to. So I really appreciate you at least speaking up and speaking out on these things and coming on the show to talk about it, because we're in this bizarre culture of fear where people are afraid to come out and speak. We get all sorts of people talking on the pandemic issues in their workplaces, everywhere from the oil field to healthcare to teaching, and they're afraid to speak, and we should never have that environment.
No. Well, look, again, my profession purports to value the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. What is Section 2? It's freedom of speech, right? You know, and we are a liberal democracy. So, like, we need the silent majority to stop being silent, because we're in a bit of a culture struggle here, too. I mean, it's all intertwined, and it's an interesting time to be alive, boy. I'll tell you that right now.
It is that, if nothing else. All right. Well, thanks for joining me, Robin. Perhaps we'll touch base on the show again down the road, and hopefully it'll be in better times. We'll talk about it when all the masks have come off.
That'd be great. Thank you, sir.
Great. Thanks, Robin. You too. Okay, and it's an interesting and ongoing discussion. I'll look at some of the comments here. You know, Rowan Robertson says, Western Standard are a year behind on this issue. Please catch up. Well, Robin, we were writing about this a year ago, and the thing is, it's still an issue, so we're still talking about it. And that's all we could do as a media organization, of course, is bring things up, bring them to light, and hope other people talk about it and move and get active. So, I mean, it was good to get a teacher break ranks and talk to these things and speak directly to it, because, I mean, he was very careful with things. You can see he doesn't want to present himself as a medical expert. He doesn't want to tell people how to take care of the kids. He's concerned and feels he should be able to have the discussion to speak up. And his point is very valid. When you've got somebody saying you're not allowed to talk about that, my alarm bells go off. That's how we get into trouble as a society, when you have no-go zones to speak on things. And perhaps the person's wrong, but a statement I always like is, we have the right to be wrong. Get out there, discuss it, debate it. And but if you say you can't talk about it, well, then I get concerned. Then the person might be right, and we're going to lose it because we've shut down debate. So hopefully more teachers, and we've been seeing healthcare workers coming up. Melanie Riston did a fantastic show a while back with a nurse and a doctor and some others on these sorts of things. And they're speaking up. They had to come in under conditions of anonymity, though, because they fear they're going to lose their jobs for speaking up. Look, those people, and I do believe the doctors who support the lockdowns even do care about their patients, whether they're right or wrong. We could discuss that. They have the right to say it, but the ones who don't support it should have that right to say that as well. We need a broad medical discussion. We need broad educational discussions. We need to cover these issues in full, and everybody's got to talk about it. So I'm glad Robin came on. As I said, hopefully the next time I have him on, if I do, it's going to be when we're talking about the end of this thing. So before I get to the next guest, let's see. I do want to talk one more time about our sponsor, Bitcoin Well. By the way, our next guest is still 10 minutes away. I have lots of stuff to talk about yet, though. Bitcoin Well is a cryptocurrency facilitation site, I would almost say, bitcoinwell.com. If you're considering cryptocurrencies, you want to look into it, you want to check these guys out, you want to invest in this sort of thing, Bitcoin Well is a great spot for it, because they lead you through it. They've got seminars showing you what cryptocurrencies are. I mean, it's kind of a big, confusing realm, but it's a huge growing one. I mean, look, some people have done really well on it. And you can get yourself away from government-controlled transactions and currencies and bank-controlled transactions and currencies. Bitcoin Well has their own ATMs. So yeah, you can go to an ATM and draw from your Bitcoin Well account. You can pay your bills through Bitcoin Well, not through Canadian dollars. It's a fantastic alternative, and it's a growing one. So check them out, bitcoinwell.com. Okay. I want to talk about one of my favorite subjects, Mayor Jyoti Gondek. It's come up now that she, we've had the Olympic, or not the Olympic, I'm going to get onto the Olympics. The arena deal has fallen apart. It did when she kept throwing costs at it and changing the deal and pushing it along. And they finally said, we're out of here. We're done. The deal is finished. And everybody's been pointing fingers and blaming everybody for this deal falling apart. And it's been interesting to watch. Now, I don't think that arenas and private organizations should be partnering with the taxpayers through City Hall or any of those things in the first place. But the bottom line is, a deal was signed. They were supposed to break ground like right now. This is when they're supposed to be starting on this thing, and it's done. It's toast. But now all of a sudden, well, a couple of things. I'll start. Gondek's getting into a fight with her own chief of staff, Stephen Carter. For people not familiar with Stephen Carter, he's like a political rash. He's the herpes of Alberta politics. He just surfaces over and over. He might subside for a while and disappear, but don't worry, that sore is going to come up when you least want to see it and meddle with your life again. He's been the face behind such political luminaries as Sandra Jansen, if you recall her, or Alison Redford, of course, Naheed Nenshi, and now he is behind Mayor Gondek. Well, and it's this picture here is chief of staff. This was from 10 years ago when he was Redford's chief of staff, because during one of his business ventures, it seems his company had left some investors and other people on the hook for $600,000 and left them with the bill. This is the character of this man who is Madam Gondek's, her worship's top advisor. This is the man behind the throne. I got a feeling their relationship is going to break up soon. His chief of staff relationships rarely last very long at all. He gets them into power, and then once they realize they got a weasel in their bedroom, they get them the hell out of there as quickly as possible. So they've gotten into a dispute already, though, where Carter was blaming Nenshi, who, remember, Carter used to work for Nenshi, for the arena deal falling apart. And then Gondek's contradicting him and saying, no, that wasn't Nenshi, and he's wrong. So you're fighting with your own chief of staff already. I got a feeling Mr. Carter's days are numbered. But one of these things to think of with these chief of staff positions too, they always get a great severance package when they get fired from their jobs, and that's provincial, federal, and municipal. So Mr. Carter will do just fine if and when Gondek fires him, which I suspect is just going to be a matter of time. Now, Mayor Gondek's been talking now, though, about sitting down to get an arena deal going again. She wants to start all over again. And this is where it gets interesting, I think. And, this is what we see with every one of these, particularly municipal politicians. A lot of their goal, a lot of their mandate is to build their own legacy. They want to have the thing to say, when I was in power, I did this. When I was in power, I did that. I clipped the ribbon on this. I started the initiative on that. We saw that with Shane Keating. His whole thing was the green line, green line, green line, green line. And then once it was in, he said, okay, I'm done. In fact, I think even before his term was up, he'd moved off to retire in Saskatchewan, an unusual retirement place. But hey, Saskatchewan's beautiful. Good on you. But that's it. That was his thing. He wants to be the man who brought the green line. Now, Ralph Klein, there was a few things that were his legacy, but one of which was the 88 Olympics. And the head Nenshi really wanted that. He wanted to be the mayor who brought the Winter Olympics back to Calgary. He was pushing for that. He was giving it all a go. And I think Carter was pro-Olympic too, but don't necessarily quote me on that. He brought in Mary Moran from Calgary Economic Development to help push for this Olympic bid in 2026. And one thing I'll give Rachel Notley credit for, she says, hey, if the city of Calgary wants to really go into this thing that could turn into a boondoggle that'll cost billions, we want to hear from those taxpayers first. It's kind of covering Rachel's own butt. Good on her. So you're going to have to put it to a plebiscite. The province is not getting behind this unless we see a clear indication that Calgarians want it. So, forced into a plebiscite campaign, Nenshi was still thought he could win the hearts and minds of Albertans, and they spent millions and millions of dollars pushing it on. I campaigned back. I understand. I love winter sports. I was aspiring to be an Olympian. I was a ski jumper. I grew up in Banff. Now, here's my picture there from when I was advocating against the Olympic bid. I dug out my old ski jumping things because I had some neat opportunities. I didn't make the Olympic cut, unfortunately, but I did get the opportunity. We would ride down into the bowl and be the first runners there during the Olympic Games at the ski jumps just before the events, and Eddie the Eagle and all those guys in '88 started up. So I got myself my little Olympic bib there, and I got my old Olympic jumping ski. Well, it wasn't Olympic, but it was the one I wore when I was there at the Olympics doing that. And I threw it on for a picture to say no to the Olympic bid. It was kind of funny. As you can see, I don't quite have the physical build that I did when I was a youthful ski jumper. And Jane has always been happy that I never, in my drinking days, drunkenly took the skis down and said, oh, maybe I could ski jump just one more time. I don't think I would survive a wipeout. But either way, I am a supporter of winter games. I love them, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily a good prospect to go into these things. And legacies. Now, we've got Jyoti Gondek. So Nenshi, the voters stood up. Our campaign was successful. And they said, you know what, Nenshi, take your Olympic dreams and jam them somewhere deep and dark. We can't afford it. We don't want it. Nenshi never ran for mayor again after that. So I guess he'll point to some of the public art things like that big blue ring up in the north end of Calgary, or those rocks on sticks over on the west side. Those are Nenshi's legacy. Somebody put a banner on those in the last provincial or civic election or 2 elections ago, said Nenshi Towers on them. It was brilliant. I got accused of doing that, and it's right up my alley. It's the sort of thing I would do. I wish I could take credit for it. I didn't do it. But hats off to whoever did. If you're one of the listeners out there, I thought it was brilliant. But you see, now we've got Gondek suddenly wanting to go into the arena again. And what do I think? She wants to make that her legacy. She's hit the ground running, but what she wants to do is put a match to everything in the past council did, burn it to the ground, and then start her own legacy. So she wants to be the one. I was the one who brought the arena to Calgary. I brought the event center. I developed what we look at now north of the Saddle Dome is a wasteland. It's just a bunch of parking lots just sitting there waiting for some sort of development to come along. And the last city council, now with the new mayor Gondek, has wiped out the development plans for it. She wants to build the Mayor Jyoti Gondek Arena. I think that's what she's working towards. She wants to have her thing that she can tell her children and grandchildren and whatnot. I was the one behind that. So she's starting the process for it. She's bringing it back up, saying we can do this. We can put it together. You know what? Get out of the way, Mayor Gondek. Don't. We can use an arena. Let's learn from our mistakes rather than just trying to embrace this legacy for yourself. Let the Flames organization and the rest build it on their own. Private enterprise can do this. Other cities have done this. I mean, you want to facilitate. Perhaps you could give some free land or have some deals. I mean, we want to make it as easy as possible. That means not dumping a bunch of conditions on them, things like that. We don't need the taxpayers partnered on it. Partnerships are difficult between a couple of people in private enterprise. They were with a city of Calgary and a private organization. Of course, it's going to fall apart. So if you cut another deal like that, it's just going to fall apart too. Or even worse, it will hold, but it'll come in at triple the costs as usual, as you guys do whenever you get a big project. You never stay on budget. Stay out of it. If anything, just say we're welcome to it. Here's the chunk of land you can use. Let's talk about it, but we're not going to be partners on this thing. But you see, you won't be able to hang the Jody Gondek Memorial Arena sign in front of it if she wasn't totally bought into this thing. So I think, unfortunately, that Mayor Gondek is going to want to take a very direct role in this, and that is, we're just going to burn. It's just frustrating. I see I got our next guest, Shane Wenzel, on deck there, so I'm going to bring him in pretty soon here. And Shane deals, he's had more frustrating deals with civic governments than anybody else. He's from Shane Homes. People are familiar with that brand name, and they've been a very involved. I mean, they're home builders, they're not developers, but within Calgary, I mean, you see it sponsoring football games, things like that. They've been his father Cal has been a striking participant in the economy and in charities and things like that. But also they've had some noteworthy battles with City Hall and trying to just facilitate market-driven home growth, and right now it's a big issue. So thank you very much for joining me today, Shane.
Well, thanks for having me, Cory.
Yeah, so I mean, interesting times as always. We never have to worry about getting bored. That's not going to happen.
If there's one thing that I've noticed in life, it's never boring.
No. So, I mean, I just want to get to, as I talked about, I think in the earlier part of the show, affordable housing, it's a big issue right now. I mean, we've got inflation, we've got people trying to get in on the housing market, get their first home and things like that. And it's tough. It's not necessarily easy to get that start. But we've got some pretty bizarre approaches coming from our federal government on what they think might make homes affordable, with the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation pitching a home equity tax. So maybe I'll start with there. Well, what do you think of how would that impact the housing market and what people are thinking of things?
Well, you know what I mean? I know where the report came from. And, to be honest, Cory, I mean, maybe it started off with good intentions, but, I fear that the outcome was almost predetermined. When I see reports like that where we talk about, well, let's add a tax onto homes even now over $1 million. Why does anybody believe that that'll actually reduce the cost of housing in this country is totally beyond me. In my 31 years, I've never seen it. Usually when you tack on a tax or an additional cost, it runs the cost of housing up.
Yes, the GST didn't bring any of our consumer costs down, if I recall. Raising income tax doesn't reduce the cost of labor. Carbon taxes haven't reduced the cost of gasoline. But this report says that putting taxes on home equity are going to bring down the cost of houses. That's pure government tease if I've ever heard it.
Well, it is an absolute tease. I mean, imagine if you purchased this $1 million home for $500,000, 10 years ago. Are you obligated to pay the government, $50,000 or $100,000 in tax on it? Well, all the consumer is going to do is they're going to add another $100,000 onto that sale price, and it's all relative. It's going to work its way up from $500,000 houses to $750,000 houses. They'll just increase their cost as well, and we'll be no better off than we are now.
No, and it puts a chill on it. I mean, a lot of us look at it as a home. It's the biggest purchase of our lives. It's an investment, and we look at it in a 30-year span if we're buying when we're young and things like that. And, well, if I'm feeling that the government's going to take a bite out of everything it grows by the time I get there, I might not consider buying one at all. But maybe that's kind of what some of the incentives, some of the ideologues are moving towards.
Well, that's certainly one of the ideologies I've heard is that, you should own nothing and be happy. Where's that term coming from?
Yeah, well, I had the good fortune to travel to the Soviet Union actually back in '87 it was, and we did some touring in Moscow, what was then Leningrad, and through the Ukraine and some spots. And something that was interesting back then was the the row housing, Moscow's a massive city, and these apartment buildings, drab and dull and boring, and they just went on for miles and miles and miles. Nobody had to worry about a mortgage. But boy, is that living? I mean, that's what we get when government takes over our housing for us.
Well, and I think that's the biggest concern. Why should government be involved in housing? And really they're the ones causing the problems at every level, and that's the biggest concern. So, I mean, irrespective of the report, I mean, if I go back to, how we got to this point, it's a lot of government intervention that has caused these issues of the rising housing costs.
Yeah, well, another thing that's happening is, I mean, we get government, the old term for it, I'm going to swivel a little more away from the equity tax, but into social engineering. They want to just kind of nudge the consumer or nudge the citizen this way or that with plans for a better utopia down the road. And something that's been going on for a long time, of course, has been the villainization of people who want to live in a single detached home in the suburbs. They're causing, they love the pejorative term urban sprawl, and keep saying we've got to force people to keep stuffing themselves downtown and live highly densely and more, it'll be more environmentally friendly and blah, blah, blah. But the consumers haven't been doing it. They're still going out. We got a donut right now in this city. We got a hollowed out downtown and properties are actually raising in value on the outskirts. I guess that's been an area of challenge for you, though, because you're trying to build in newer districts, and we've got a city administration that sometimes just doesn't want to facilitate that.
Well, I mean, I think we've watched that kind of develop over the last 11, 12 years, Cory. And I mean, it's a direct reflection of this report. Even when you start tacking on costs in the form of lot levies and a bunch of other policies and a bunch of other fees, you naturally watch new homes climb, upwards of $80,000-$90,000. If you squash the growth, raw land prices tripled over that time frame. So there's a lot of happy farmers out there, and I'm glad for them. But,
it's rare when a farmer's happy.
The end purchaser is the one who's paying for all of this. So, I mean, when you look at the disparity, I mean, the quickest way of doing that is, with all those increases and comparing Calgary to Edmonton, and there's a $60,000-$70,000 price swing between the two cities for virtually the same product. Now, why did that happen?
Yeah, there's I think we can think of one big factor, but we'll leave him go. He's in the past now. Yes. But the same attitude in administration does exist to a degree. And there's one councillor, for example, I don't expect you to go after individual councillors. That's my job. But Giancarlo Carra, him and I had a good battle a few years ago, because I wrote a piece and I went and studied and I looked at housing costs in all of the density paradises that move towards what he felt was the ideal utopia versus all those sprawling ones, because they always say they care for the little guy and rents and so on. Well, I tell you, the trend is very distinct. If you want to facilitate home ownership or even low cost of living for renting, you want to go to Phoenix, you want to go to Houston, Dallas, Las Vegas, even, because they allowed outward growth. Ironically, even Portland allows a lot of outward growth. People don't realize that. It's just the core where they're insane. But the high density areas, San Francisco, New York City, even Philadelphia, spots like that, the costs are astronomical. I mean, you can't get in on those housing markets. They're out of control. So this myth that higher density leads to lower costs is quite starkly wrong.
Well, and that's been the experience, Cory. Of course, that would fit their true definition of urban sprawl with what's happening in states like Texas or even California when you get out into Riverside. But they, again, there's a place for everyone, and I think that's where a lot of the issues come up. Is there's a utopia that's perceived in the core of any city, and everything else after that becomes a bit of a black eye. And really, if you let the market decide, the market will find this happy balance that any city, I think, would be happy to have, because it increases your tax base and it gives people options. If you want to live, well, in your case, you want to live out on an acreage, then why can't you? And why should you be shamed for doing that? So it's an ideology that's baffled me all the years that I've been involved in this business, and it hasn't changed. It's only grown a lot worse.
Well, yeah, I mean, the invisible hand, market forces, it will take the best route possible if we'll just let it. I want to address something we've talked about in the past, and it gets frustrating. It comes back into the villainization of certain areas and certain people, and I liken it to the ever ongoing myth about how much oil and gas is subsidized, even though in reality, what they're talking about is just taxes not taken. I mean, if you live under the assumption that everything is the government's and they allow us to take a portion, then every reduction of tax is considered a subsidy in that bizarro world. But in reality, that those subsidies aren't there. The urbanists, I guess, or the high density zealots, and as I put them sometimes, like to say that they're subsidizing people in new developments, and they're the ones footing the bill for all of those new communities. But in reality, again, those new developments have to pay for all that infrastructure. They're not getting subsidized at all.
There's absolutely nothing that isn't paid for in that new subdivision by any of the other taxpayers. About the only thing that you would see that's needed is an upgrade to services, to the electrical grid. But I mean, to put that in perspective, Cory, if you were to build the same amount of units in the core, you're tearing up streets, sidewalks, and roadways, and very, very old infrastructure. You're still paying for that upgrade. The only difference is one's in suburbia and one's in the core. So I guess my argument would be, well, it's going to cost you 2 to 3 times more to build that same density in the core as it is out in suburbia. And again, not everybody wants to live in the concrete jungle. Some people, as we found throughout the past year after lockdowns, found that they needed more space and they wanted a backyard and they wanted to get back in touch with nature. So those are what market forces are telling you right now. Absolutely.
And I mean, acting as if, again, that the people in the suburbs aren't paying for it. They act as if once you get there, you settle in and you don't pay anymore. Well, no, there's still going to be property taxpayers going forward and paying into, the collective fund for our library, parks, and all the beautiful public art they love choosing on our behalf and things like that. So it's not like they come in, but they paint them as parasites, and I get really annoyed and frustrated with that sometimes. And nothing against those who want the urban living as well. I mean, good on you, but don't act like it's free. I've talked about that before. You go to those inner city areas, where a lot of infills are coming in, and they're really packing the density in, and some of that's demand as well. People want to live down there, and if you're going to expand, you have to squeeze more houses. But you notice that if you drive down the road, you go over a bump, it seems like every 30 feet or so. Well, what that is because they've had to cut into the new sewer and water lines because they're doubling the houses on that street. Every time you build a new infill, you've got to cut in. Eventually, those pipes get overloaded. They weren't built to handle that much. And we saw with 17th Avenue with their, 50-year project or whatever, it felt like it, just upgrading old infrastructure. It had to be done. That's fine. But let's not have the illusion that it's easy or inexpensive to upgrade that infrastructure, especially compared to greenfield development where you're digging into an open field and you can put in modern, long-lasting infrastructure while you're at it.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that example up. It's probably the best one to use because you've seen a number of the buildings along 17th Avenue be upgraded, and part of the reason they're being upgraded is for the new buildings, and the other reason they're being upgraded is because the services are 80 years old.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't last. You have forever. To upgrade the size, and you have to take out the old piping to make sure that there's no leaks. Of course, that's why you see the emergency water services machines around there. If you see one of those on the street, that just means that something's failed.
Yeah, and you tend to, I am upfront with it. I drive Uber in my spare time. I like doing it. I like getting around. And that's part of what I like is it lets me talk to people and observe things. And I tell you, you see a heck of a lot more of those emergency water services trailers in the inner city areas than you do in the new developments. And the reason is because the infrastructure is it's old. It wears out. I mean, and the newer stuff is better. I mean, we've gotten better at these things, but we need to break.
And it's sized for the community that's built around it. Whereas you go into an older community, if a block is sized up for 12 old 1950s bungalows and you want to stick up a 300 unit high rise, the services are inadequate to supply that.
It's not as easy as just plunking it in there, despite the way that they try to frame it. I mean, we got a new administration. I'm hoping some common sense comes in, because another thing that was unexpected by everybody was the pandemic. And as you said, the people are less inclined to work downtown or live downtown than they've ever been. And a lot have realized that they can or will work from home from here on in. And that means you want a little bit of space. You want a backyard. You want a little more elbow room between yourself and your neighbors. And we're seeing that demand going outwards. What can this council do perhaps just to facilitate, I guess, responsible growth?
Well, I mean, there's always that argument about cutting red tape, and I think that's probably one of the biggest ones is taking away the barriers to it, because as the IMF is identified, in Canada's case, we're over 1 million housing units short of fulfilling what our needs are in this country. I can't imagine what that is in Calgary or Alberta, but get rid of the damn red tape. I mean, that's what's causing the delays. If you go out and you buy a piece of raw land right now, as an example, it might take you anywhere from 6 to 12 years before this land is actually brought on. Now, I know
Yeah,
there's constraints that the city's working with for funding and for upgrading of services, and they want to utilize their dollars in the best way possible. I completely understand that, but we got to get back to working within partnerships as well.
yeah. I wrote a
Seems to
column
be
on that.
very adverse, or more adversity over the last 10 to 12 years than anything.
Absolutely. And I think it was last fall when I wrote on that, and I broke down, it was a little dry, so it didn't get the most reads as some of my more inflammatory ones. But all of these insane permits and applications that a new development has to go through, and the waiting time for approval is months to years. And 8 to 12 years from basically the concept to somebody moving in, that's absurd. And at any one of those steps, it could fall apart. So that makes it difficult for investors and people to look into that long term. And it should be a relatively easy fix. You're right. Just streamline.
It should be. It really should be. But more, at least on top of that, again, let's work together. I mean, we built this city together with past administrations. We need to continue to do that. And the only way we can do that is if we share information and we learn to compromise again, as opposed to always being at each other's throats about, who's got to pay for this, who's got to pay for that. Like, let's come together and let's get it done. Yeah.
And I mean, as we said, responsible development. I want to see a whole city. I don't want to see it built like a donut. I don't want to see a central desert going on in there. But I think, as people move outwards, if you stop pushing them right out of city, because a lot are going to Okotoks or Pritis. I've seen houses being built around my place all the time, Cochrane. If we keep them in the city, other people will want to move towards the core, and it will fill in. I mean, it's just the property values and rents will adjust to balance the demand. But if we keep meddling with it, we just tend to make a mess.
And I think that's the issue, Cory. I mean, it's that ideology coming into play again, and it's got to be put aside for the right reasons. This is what Calgarians want, and ultimately the taxpayer is who's paying the bill at the end of the day. So, let's get together. Let's make this happen. And let's do it. For the sake of our kids and our future.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I'm glad to get, happy to get you on as well, just to talk, because I've talked to you a number of times. You're a reasonable, soft-spoken person. You're not the haywire ideologue like I am, and in your face and looking for conflict. But you speak on behalf of your industry and just your thoughts in general. So, I mean, as we see, as you said, you want to work together because you have to work together with city administration, with city elected officials. The property developers and builders aren't unreasonable, crazy people. They can be talked with. So don't let some of the ideologues we got downtown paint you guys as intransigent nutcases. At least not on this issue. You might have some other ones you're crazy on, but we'll get another show for that.
Oh, probably.
But either way, just in your approach, we're saying, as you said, we need just cooperation. We can talk, we can do this. And you've got an opportunity because there's so many fresh faces now on council. I mean, you still got a lot of the old administration in City Hall, that's fine. But council theoretically are going to be the guiding ones on it. And maybe you can develop some more productive relationships, and they'll recognize just that difference in consumer demand from whatever their ideologies may be.
Well, and I think that's the hope, Cory, is that moving forward, that that things have improved to some degree on council. That we'll see less in-camera meetings and more proper debate, for the public to view and participate in. And I think that's got to be the long-term goal. That's the only way this city will succeed.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it's still a great city, and there's so much potential, so many good people, and we can keep it that way if we can just keep our heads about us as time comes. So I appreciate you coming on. And as I said, where I started to, that home equity tax has really got a lot of us concerned and scared. And I think people need to keep their eyes open. The government always denies it when they keep floating that balloon, but they keep floating it. I mean, how many times are you going to keep testing those waters before we got to think they're not just testing the waters, they plan on jumping in at some time?
This has been 3 or 4 so far, Cory, and like I said, maybe the intention of it was well intended, rather. I just fear that the outcome is, was predetermined, and it's going to backfire. It is going to do the exact opposite of what it's intended to.
Yeah, where there's smoke, there's fire. Well, thanks very much for coming on to talk to me, Shane. It's always good. Where can people follow you and keep track of you to get your thoughts and things in the future? I know you've been doing some great YouTube videos and other things as well that I've been watching over the last few months.
It's easy just to look for at Shane Wenzel, and from the company's perspective, just at Shane Homes.
Well, right on. I hope we can get you on to talk again sometime soon down the road, and I really appreciate you coming on today, Shane.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Shane. So yeah, I've had Shane on before, and as you can see, I mean, he's just a great guy to talk with some good common sense, and he's involved in that market. And they're not the crazed mustache tweaking developers or things like that. These are business people, well-established, good Calgarians, multi-generational, and they've had some terrible conflict with our city hall over some of the years with differing views on things. And they, of course, yes, from a business point of view, are going to be pretty darn concerned with things like a home equity tax that's going to, even though raise the price of homes, suppress demand for them. I mean, it's just a bad formula all around. We're all going to lose, perhaps that's what some of these people want to see down the road. As I said, is that that Soviet-style world where the government actually does run and manage housing. I mean, again, do you really want? People say this is a need, so government must manage it. I don't like that. That's the thing I would least want government to manage. I mean, the Soviet Union managed food. Ask the Ukrainians how well that worked out for them. Or when I was there were lineups for groceries. They had basic food. They had lots of it. It's just, it was bland and there was very little variety and it was miserable. So yeah, they weren't starving. Well, they were in the Ukraine, but when I saw, Moscow and Leningrad back then, they weren't starving, but they weren't exactly eating gourmet food either. I mean, we're talking a bland black bread and potato diet. That's government management of your food. Now, how much do you want government to manage your house? Because that's a need, and that's what they're getting into, and that's how poorly it goes. That's the row housing, the ghettos, the ugliness. I used to work in Pittsburgh a lot. If you ever drive south of Niagara Falls and you're headed into states there, have a look to your right when you go through Buffalo and see all those horrific red brick buildings, those slums, those ghettos. That's government housing projects. That's what happens when government takes over housing and gets the free market out of it. We aren't better off for it. So yeah, it was a great chat with Shane. Again, he's got a lot of good insight into these things. So before I get on, I'm going to be talking to Linda. I see her on deck. It's just great with exposing the CBC. They've been taking a beating lately for a number of things that they've been exposed for. Unfortunately, we're still stuck paying for those jerks, but we're getting closer perhaps to getting free of them. I'm going to mention Bitcoin Well one more time, though. They're our sponsor. They offer services for cryptocurrencies, for Bitcoin, bitcoinwell.com. Go online, check these guys out. They offer, again, I mean, it seems like a big, broad, confusing world, these cryptocurrencies. Well, these guys will lead you through it. They'll show you how you can get in. You don't have to be a millionaire to play around with these things. And it's not something you just throw money into and watch and hope it gets better. Or it's practical currency that you can use. You can use it at an ATM. Bitcoin Well has their own ATMs all over Western Canada. There's a map showing where they are at. So you can draw cash on your Bitcoin account. You can set up, you can pay your bills online with Bitcoin. It's just like any other bank account, currency, things like that. It's that easy. bitcoinwell.com. They'll show you how to get into the cryptocurrency game. Now, I'm going to start this with Linda Slobodian. If you go to westernstandardonline.com, she put out a great column talking about some very extreme individuals who got a contract to do a documentary from the CBC. They're working for the CBC, and they make no bones about the fact that they work for the CBC. In a couple of videos, they have done so. So they were out there. Some of the terms some people are using is embedded reporters or whatever else. They were taking part in the Coastal GasLink illegal blockades on the road, the pipeline in BC. I mean, these guys built shacks and houses and illegally blocked the road, blocked in oil and gas workers into a camp, many of whom were First Nations people, by the way, who couldn't get food and water. It was eco-terrorism. There was no choice but for the RCMP to come in and remove these illegal extremists from the road. Well, when they came in, they found these journalists that they arrested, and the journalist associations have all gone off. Oh my God, it's infringing on the right of free journalism, which is a thing of concern. We don't want governments infringing on journalism. Boy, we sure don't want that here. But we don't go out as journalists and pretend like you don't join the protest, you observe it. You can be right there with it, but you aren't a part of it. You aren't an active member of it. Well, these guys are extremists, and they were most definitely members of it, and Linda exposed it. So I'm going to frame this before I bring Linda on and show a video of one of them. You can listen to the attitude of this gentleman. He is one of the journalists, as a police officer came to try and seek one of the contacts they have at this illegal camp. And just look at the attitude from this guy.
Michael, you're here in journalistic endeavors, aren't you, sir? You're required to answer that question. You know that, Michael. Are you here as a journalist or as a protester?
What do you think?
I'm asking you that question. It's not what I think. You're required to answer that question. Madam Justice Church has required you to answer that question.
No, she hasn't, actually.
Are you here as a journalist or as a protester?
I'm here as a journalist.
Okay. Is Mrs. Williams here? Is Mrs. Williams here?
Don't know who that is.
Well, she's the matriarch who we spoke to on Monday. You don't know if she's here? Okay. Please ensure you abide by your conditions, Mr. Toledano.
You should familiarize yourself with my conditions.
Oh, I'm very familiar with them.
Okay, so I just simply have to appear in court.
What a piece of work, eh? That belligerent weenie was there ostensibly to film a documentary, and you got to pay for it with your tax dollars because it was through the CBC. That was not a journalist. That was one of the illegal protesters. So let's bring Linda in to talk about this here. I see her on deck. Hey, Linda, how you doing?
Hi, Cory. Thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, great to have you on board. Like I said, I loved your column, and we really need to expose this sort of thing. So can you run down like who these two guys are and what that whole chain of involvement is between them and the protesters and the CBC? And we're going to bring up, for those who are listening to this in audio podcast, just some of the tweets from these guys that they've been very public about how extreme these guys are that are playing the role of journalists here.
And that was a fine example of police brutality, was it not?
Oh, he was vicious.
Okay, so apparently it's all over their social media sites, and the Canadian Association of Journalists referred to it, doing a documentary. It's called Yinta Land, on the issue with the pipeline going through the area. Now, this guy's been embedded with hereditary chiefs and protesters for the past 3 years. And he's interesting. He's by no means an unbiased reporter. This guy on his social media sites invites people to come down for this or that protest, and he's not the most interesting one. Another fellow by the name of Franklin Lopez, who is billed as an editor and co-producer of this CBC documentary For the Passionate Eye. He has a long, dark history of inciting activism in underground movements. His social media sites show scenes of carnage, buildings and vehicles burning. He highlighted the Fox News Christmas tree that was set ablaze just before Christmas. He celebrates this stuff. And he's not inviting people to attend tea parties. So these two are making this documentary for CBC that we're paying for, and they shouldn't be.
No, there's no doubt. And as you were speaking, Nico was pulling up some screenshots I'd taken of some of the tweets from these two individuals, and you could just see the pictures of it. There were flaming bulldozers, and they celebrate violence. I mean, there's pictures of riots and dangerous actions, and these guys from all over the world, like these guys get off on riots. You can see it. You can see that trend in what they're putting out there. If anything, not only while they're embedded with these protesters, I could see guys who like this kind of violence trying to incite the protesters further to lead to an escalation of that whole situation. I mean, that is not the role of a journalist whatsoever.
Well, this Lopez character, I mean, he's connected to Antifa. His brands, It's Going Down, Street Politics 101, a documentary he did that celebrated all of this nonsense, and his domains, nciv.com, why I presume that's ncivilization.com, some names that I would not say on air or in my kitchen. Submedia, there's a sweet domain that has all sorts of stuff. So what concerns me as much as the CBC hooking up with these guys is that the Canadian Association of Journalists leapt to their defense and rallied to have the Mounties back off after they arrested them. And Mounties don't just arrest people. Well, maybe church people, but they didn't just arrest this Tolentino and what was the girl's name? What was the other reporter's name?
I can't remember it offhand. Yeah,
Brack. They were in jail for 3 days, and so the CAJ raised up and was very indignant about the Mounties interfering with freedom of the press and so on. And it was signed by 45 journalists or organizations and the BC Civil Liberties Association. How do all these people not know who's involved and what's really going on behind this documentary? How do they all not know that?
Well, and that concerns one. The Canadian Association for Journalists, I mean, they should be speaking up if we see any examples of the state hindering, legitimate journalism, absolutely. But they should also be speaking up for the integrity of journalism in general and saying, hey, we don't represent guys who cloak themselves as journalists while they take an active part in illegal protests. I mean, that's beyond the line of the protected journalism. I mean, that's why the police officer kept asking over and over, because they know where that lands. So they want to make sure, are you a journalist today or are you a protester today? And these guys are trying to cross the lines, and the Journalism Association should be calling it out, not defending these guys.
Absolutely, because it hurts legitimate journalists. And it's unfair to Canadian taxpayers. I mean, that bloated CBC, that's $1.5 billion. And there are some good reporters and news people in there, and they're being crushed and silenced by this woke crowd and not supported by fraidy cat editors who are being pushed around by them. And that's got to stop. It's just got to stop.
It's an organization that's just sick to its very core, unfortunately. And there were some, I mean, in the older days, some incredible CBC journalism and personalities, but we got to go back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s to find most of them now. And they did some magnificent work, but now it's the exception when you see something good out of the CBC rather than the rule, and we're paying for it. I mean, I wouldn't care if journalists could put out all the crap they want if it's privately funded. That's their business, but we got no choice. We have to pay for these guys.
And then another thing, Cory, is the 20 First Nations who signed on to this pipeline deal and will benefit greatly from it. Nobody's talking about them. They're talking, and they're saying that these protesters aren't members of the band, that they're outsiders. But not everybody. CBC, it seems, they're leaping to the defense of these embedded protesters and ignoring the legitimate First Nations wanting the pipeline to go ahead.
Yeah, and it's terribly frustrating for First Nations people who want it. I spoke to Melissa Ambarkey earlier this week, and she's been outspoken on those things, and she's an Indigenous person who grew up on reserve, and she wants to see, as do all 20 of the people on that pipeline that the mainstream media quite often refuses to mention, all supported and made deals for this pipeline to go through. It's just a tiny minority who are holding it up, yet the many elements in the media, particularly the CBC, are acting as if that small element of extremists represent the whole, and they do not by any means.
No, they don't. They don't, and that's not journalism. That's activism.
Absolutely. Well, and your journalism has been great and on point. You know, Claudette Lease, one of the commenters, said, "Hey, where can we find this?" Again, Linda put that column up a couple of days ago at westernstandardonline.com. Go in there and check it out. You can find it and read it in full. And I think you're going to be following up on this some more, aren't you, Linda?
I am. Yes, Cory, I am.
Okay, great. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today to expand on it, and I really like what you're writing. I'm glad you got that. I mean, we should be more people screaming from the rooftops. This is what our state broadcaster is doing with our dollars right now. So at least you're covering it and continuing to do so. So thank you very much, and I hope we can talk to you on one of your future calls really soon.
Okay, Cory, thanks so much.
All right, awesome, Linda. Thanks. Okay, yeah, I mean, it's something else. You know, I looked, and Linda sent me another link to another video this guy, one of these clowns, put up, and it was just too long. You know, it's like a 17-minute video. I'll see if I can put it up on Twitter later or something else, because what they did was these guys, again, they built this shack in the middle of the road. This is what these protesters do, and they block all traffic, and then they try this baloney. You know, they say, oh, this is now First Nations housing, and it's a medicine lodge, and every other crackpot trick in the book, you know, so you can't take it down. And it's just a shack on a road. And eventually, you know, the police were forced to break into it. So what they all did was they huddled into this shack, and the police actually had to take chainsaws because they nailed the doors shut on themselves, you know, these protesters, and chainsaws and cut their way in. So of course, now they're all screaming, making their videos. Oh, look, the police are after us with chainsaws. No, they aren't. They're cutting your dumb asses out of there. You could have come out anytime you wanted. And they arrested them. But the funny part with this video, and these guys posted it as if they're victims, these quote unquote journalists. And the first thing he starts screaming over and over, I'm with the CBC, I'm with the CBC, because he's trying to keep his ass from getting arrested. You were locked in there with those lunatics. Don't pretend. I mean, it reminds me of bicyclists, you know, those clowns, you see them prancing around in their spandex downtown. When it's practical, they're pedestrians. When it's practical, they're vehicles, so they should be in the middle of the road, you know, but they want to use the crosswalk when they want to ride on that, and they want to use the bike lane when they want, but they don't when they don't want to. It's just when it's practical for them. Well, these guys, they're journalists when they're about to be arrested, but the rest of the time, they're clearly among and with the protesters. They're not even being a bit supportive of them. They're taking part with them. I mean, a lot of documentaries will have a leaning and, a bias. Fine, it makes it quite often more interesting, though I'd rather not see them getting our tax dollars to do it. But you don't get right in and be one of the protesters. That's not, you're not a journalist anymore. You're just a promoter of the group. You're a promoter of these protesters. I mean, look at this. Yeah, the cat's out of their bag. That's what he says right there. Yinta's a CBC production. So there he's saying himself. We're not speculating. You know, look at his picture showing a bulldozer on fire. That's just not good. Nico, we got a spammer on the comments section, so if you could block that account when you get a chance. Part of the joys of being live, but we have some great commenters. Otherwise, yes, I do like to talk about our spandex aficionados. I do like to work up our cyclists. I'll kind of close off the show with a quick rant about my little buddies on the cycles. I've been taking pictures as I walk to the office because I go by a bunch of these bike tracks on 8th Avenue where they are... it's priority one for street clearing. So they plow it as soon as a snowflake falls so that the snowflakes can ride their bicycles on it. And even if a little more snow falls, I take pictures because there's not even bike tracks. Nobody's using these things, like 4 or 5 a day tops. And I put a tweet out saying, you could do something along the lines. You could hear the screaming of these poor guys getting into their offices trying to chip their frozen scrotums from the inside of their spandex. I mean, really, riding bicycles in minus 30 is ridiculous. Hey, if you're crazy enough to do it, it's your thing. You get off on it. Good for you. But we got to don't make the whole city pay for the infrastructure for this small handful of crazy people downtown. It gets back again to the ideological swing of our city council. Oh, we're going to fill the downtown. Big businesses want to move into an area with clogged up traffic and bike lanes that are empty in minus 30 weather. No, they don't. They want low taxes, a friendly business environment, and a nice city to live in. And bike tracks downtown don't offer any of those things, but they're expanding. They're expanding all the time. Every street you go, they seem to be building a new one. So that should be enough for today before we get into the weekend. But I want to remind everybody, go to the westernstandardonline.com and take out a membership if you haven't already. This is how we can keep going. We're not like the CBC. We're not sucking tax dollars out of you like a parasite as the CBC does. We rely on the viewers, the listeners, and sponsors to keep us rolling. And you guys have been great. We're growing. We're doing fantastic, but we need more. This is how we can get more reporters. This is how we can get more columnists. This is how we get better gear so I don't get a technical hiccup like we did yesterday. So go to westernstandardonline.com. Take out a membership. It's a free trial for at first. I think you'll find it worth your $10 a month. I mean, it's a good deal. Or if you buy it for a year, I think it's $100. More than your money's worth, and it helps us, and we can keep doing these things and countering the crap the mainstream media is feeding you. So this has been week one of the return of Cory Morgan Show, now labeled Triggered, and I am often triggered about many things. Come back on Monday, 11:30 a.m. We're going to be back on live. I'm going to have guests Lindsay Seawalt. She's with Alberta Proud, and they've been doing some great work online, standing up for Alberta, energy sector, things like that. I'm going to be talking to author Michael Wagner, and he's written a column about Alberta independence, and he's written books about Alberta independence. So this is a man after my own heart. We'll certainly be able to find lots to talk about that we can agree upon, I am sure. So thank you all, guys, for joining me today. Like and share on Facebook and all those social media majors. If you want to get into a good fight with me where I drop all of the pretenses of being nice or avoid using four-letter words, follow me on Twitter, Cory B. Morgan, and I'll happily berate and insult you in person online on Twitter. You all have a good weekend. It's supposed to warm up. Hopefully we can kind of enjoy ourselves a little out of this deep freeze, and I'll see you on Monday.